Do you ever feel like you're passed over at work for promotions because you're not an aggressive extrovert? I'm asking because I had an initially surprising finding in my research on the unwritten rules of work. In my most recent quantitative study, I found what my previous interviews had already confirmed, that people are expected to learn to be more assertive in their workplaces, but not to be perceived as too aggressive. A lot of research shows that when people are assertive at work, they have better psychological well being. But a lot of that research has been done on Western white people who are part of the upper middle class. And for different cultures, this can have a different impact. And so I dug into some research on some cultural differences because I also noticed that in my study, race was not a significant predictor of assertiveness, but it was of being perceived as aggressive. And what I found from other people's research is that in a lot of Asian and Latin American cultures, there's a higher power distance in the culture, meaning there's more deference for higher authority, like your parents or elders, and that speaking back to them is highly frowned upon. It can be seen as disrespectful. Doesn't mean you don't disagree, but to assert yourself is considered rude. And honestly, as someone from a very religious background in the South and working class culture, and I made a video earlier this week on how working class culture is also very obedience culture oriented, at least in the United States, I can relate to that. There's also gender differences there. The problem you run into at work in the US is that you are expected to assert yourself in meeting. You're not going to be able to negotiate pay or get your ideas heard or get a promotion if you're not asserting yourself. So for people in these in-between cultures, being raised in one and evaluated in another, you're stuck. If you stay quiet, you don't move up. You're not leadership material. But when you do speak up, it can feel like betraying everything your family taught you. And so I hypothesized that that might be why assertiveness in my study was surprisingly related with lower psychological safety at work. That even though people reported having to learn how to be assertive, it didn't make them feel good and it didn't make them feel safe. Now, another reason for that would be that these same groups are also perceived as aggressive when they do assert themselves. And I'll be talking about that in other videos. But here's what workplace leaders need to understand. The problem isn't inherently that people lack assertiveness. The problem is designing workplaces to only reward a certain type of it with one cultural communication style. We need to learn how to value different ways of contributing, because quiet doesn't mean disengaged, and respectful doesn't mean passive, and loud does not also mean the best idea or that it's thought through at all. So I'm curious, if you have ever experienced this conflict, how have you navigated it? I'm working on this chapter right now in my book, The Unwritten Rules of Work, but I released last week a free draft of a chapter that I've already finished. You can get a free download on my website, drkarlschmidt.com.